This all started 2 weeks ago when I put out some of our crazy research where we found that if you were a wide receiver one inside the top 5 offenses in the NFL that season, you had a 24% chance to be a top 3 wide receiver in fantasy, which is incredible, right? I mean, oh my gosh. Yeah, draft wide receivers in good offenses. And what we also found is if you're the wide receiver one inside a bottom 5 offense in the NFL in total points scored, you had a 16% chance to be a top 24 wide receiver in fantasy. So yes, if you were in a great offense, you are more likely as the wide receiver one to be a top 3 option in fantasy than if you were in a bottom 5 offense than just to crack the top 24. This research in my mind almost completely shifted the way that I'm viewing the wide receiver position. I've never seen anybody put out anything like this. And what we did at the end of that video is I went out and said, okay, yeah, Malik Neighbors at the 2-3 turn on Underdog right now, not draftable. Oh, Keon Coleman, where you're getting him as the wide receiver 45 and the Bills project out to be a top 5 offense, draft him as much as you can. Doesn't matter if it's ESPN, doesn't matter if it's Sleeper, doesn't matter if it's Underdog. Wide receiver 45 is an absolute steal. But a lot of people push back in completely valid points that we're going to address in this video, and we're going to have some massive takeaways. The main pushback was twofold. One, that Vegas, they don't really know what they're doing, right? I mean, they're not necessarily that much better than you are. They're not that much better than I am. And they get things wrong all the time. You go and look at the Houston Texans last season. Nobody knew CJ Stroud was going to be that good. Do you really want to be passing on Nico Collins because you think the Texans are going to be a bad offense? The second thing is a lot of people coming out, and I completely understand this point. I've heard it a ton before, saying, you know what, Mason, Vegas doesn't really care about putting out accurate projections. Instead, they just want to have even money on both sides of a bet, right? If they're going to put out, say, the Cowboys -7, it doesn't really matter how that game projects as long as they know that half the country is going to be betting on the Panthers +7 and the other half's going to be betting on the Cowboys -7, and they can just make the rake. So I wanted to dive into both of these things, and I wanted to actually see when Vegas got things wrong, how we could possibly predict that going forward in some offenses this season that may be underrated that we could expect a big time finish from. Now let's go ahead and let's first address the overall thought process that Vegas doesn't care about putting out accurate lines. They just want to be 50% money on one side, 50% money on the other side. And we go ahead and we look at this. And what I did is we found this data, which I'll link down below. This site put out some incredible historical odds. And we actually got to see the favorite against the spread historical rate every single week over the past 10 years. These are thousands of football games here. And if you go year by year, the favorite against the spread is at 52%, 46%, 48%, 45%, 46%, 46%, 54%, 50%, 48%, 48.5%. So you can sit here and go, oh, okay, that's interesting. Underdogs win slightly more against the spread than favorites do. Maybe that's your takeaway. My takeaway is, hell, it's a 50-50 coin flip, essentially. Vegas isn't going out there. They're not putting out lines that they think they're going to have half the action on one side, half the action on the other side. This is pretty damn close to 50-50, and I would argue about as accurate as you're going to find. If we go over and look at similar things with the over-under here, the over-under is also interesting where you're at 46%, 44%, 47%, 50%, 50%, 47%, 46%, 52%, 49%, and 46%. So we can sit here and we can say, oh, okay, the under actually hits more often than the over does. If you are betting, maybe you should look for unders. Now, that's not my main takeaway. My main takeaway is it's pretty damn close to 50%. It's pretty damn close to a coin flip. So if we look at this large sample, we're able to identify, okay, at least from a week-to-week perspective, Las Vegas sportsbooks can be pretty damn accurate when it comes to both the spreads that they put out as well as the over-unders. I would make an argument that if I made you go out there and put a spread out every single week, it would not be close to 50-50. Okay. I mean, it is incredible the amount of data that they work with and incredible how accurate they can actually be. And we want to at least explain real quick what an implied team total is. So an implied team total is you're able to take the spread of an NFL game as well as the over under of that NFL game. Just essentially do a little bit of math and you're able to see exactly what Las Vegas sportsbooks are putting out for the projection that that team's going to score that week. The implied team total is important because this is the formula that was used to figure out what Vegas sportsbooks were telling us for total points scored at the end of the season. Now, Completely understand the next point, right? Well, Mason, Vegas can be very accurate from a week-to-week perspective. I mean, if they're going in on a Sunday morning, they know exactly who's active. They know exactly who's inactive. I mean, they know what the weather's going to be. Once they have all that data, then they can put out accurate predictions. But from a season-long perspective, maybe that's not the case. So what we decided to do is we decided to go ahead and look at Las Vegas win totals from this same site every single season over the past 10 years. You have no idea how long this took me to organize all this. So please bear with me. So let me explain this real quick. We took every single win total for every single team, every season over the past 10 years. We looked at the Las Vegas Sportsbook win total going into the season. That's saying like, oh, okay, maybe Vegas right now is telling us that the Chiefs are at 11.5 this next year. I haven't pulled up this year's numbers. You can see them on the screen now. And then we looked at what their actual wins were at the end of the season. And we looked at the difference between those two. So if we're looking at 2023 as an example, the best teams in the NFL were supposed to be the Chiefs, the Eagles, and the Bengals. If we look at the amount of games that these teams won, the Chiefs won 11 games in comparison to their 11.5 win total. The Eagles won 11 games in comparison to their 11.5 win total. The Bengals won 9 games in comparison to their 11-game win total. So if you're looking at the differences there, you had half a win, and 2 wins. So what we did is I took every single one of those differences that we manually did over the past 10 years, all 32 teams every single season, and we bucketed these off into 3 main buckets. I wanted to look at the projection that Vegas was accurate with. How I'm deeming accurate maybe is going to be different than how you are. I'm going to look at any projection that Vegas was within 1.5 games of. That is an accurate projection from Las Vegas Sportsbooks. If they were in the ballpark, but not exact, I'm going to deem that 2 to 3 games off. And if they were way off, we're going to deem that 3.5 wins or more. So that can be one way or another, right? Where we go back and we look at this past season where the Rams were projected to win only 6.5 games. They win 10. Vegas was way off with that. The Rams were way better than they were expecting. Or maybe the Chargers last season. The Chargers were projected to win 9.5 games. They only win 6. Vegas was way off, and we need to dive into what happened, and we need to look at what happened there. So this is going to be the first chart that we have. We tracked all of this. But there is an issue with this data. And the issue is going to be that the over-under odds on this spread, they're going to change. It's not like every single one of these lines was at minus 110. Obviously, minus 110 is what Vegas gives you if they deem that a bet's going to be 50-50. But some of these, like you go back this past season, the Patriots were at 7.5 wins, but it was like minus 150 to the under. So just because that was the line that was out there, Vegas sportsbooks were going, okay, yeah, we know that's not that accurate of a line. So you're going to have to pay a bunch of money if you want to get decent odds on it. So what we decided to do to kind of even this out and only look at the projections that Vegas deemed, I want to say pseudo accurate, is any bet that had an over under odds of either minus 130, plus 130, it doesn't matter. If the number was 130 or more, I'm going to take that out of the sample. We're still working with hundreds and hundreds of instances, and I'm going to show you the data on both ends. But yeah, we are not going to bore you with every single season. I did the math. You can see it all on the screen. Maybe we can show it occasionally. You can pause and double check if you really want to. But the important thing is going to be the takeaway that we have here. If we look at all the win totals in determining when Vegas was very accurate, in the ballpark, or completely off base, they were very accurate about 46% of the time, in the ballpark about 30% of the time, and completely off base about 22% of the time. If we go to the close win totals, this is going to be when we removed any of those lines that maybe had odds that were 130 or higher. And we're only looking at 110, 115, 120, 125. Here, Vegas was accurate about 52% of the time. They were in the ballpark about 25% of the time, and they were completely off about 22% of the time. Now, this is interesting in my mind. So it just gives you a baseline feel on where Vegas is if they are just completely off base all the time, if these season-long win totals are going to be reliable resources. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to look at when they weren't reliable resources. So going back to that video, and the main issue that y'all had with me is I was saying like, oh, okay, this is what Las Vegas sportsbooks are projecting out to be the top 5 offenses in the NFL this season. I mean, I'll go ahead, I'll pull this up for you right now because we're actually going to talk about the possibility of them being wrong and where you can maybe profit from this. So if we're going to look at the top 5 projected offenses, this isn't win total. Like I said, this is combining all the data that we looked at. This is implied team total. It's going to be a little bit different, but tomato. Here we're still proving they're accurate from a season-long perspective. They're very accurate from a week-to-week perspective. But anyway, the best offenses projected out in the NFL right now, kind of the best teams too. The Chiefs, Lions, Niners, Dolphins, Bills, Bengals, Ravens, Cowboys. The worst teams are the Patriots, the Broncos, the Carolina Panthers, the Giants, the Titans, the Raiders, and the Commanders. So what I wanted to look at is whenever we put out that video saying, oh, here are the bottom 5 teams, don't draft their wide receivers. And everybody was screaming, oh, Mason, you don't get it. Daniel Jones is healthy now. Daniel Jones is going to be great. How often was a team projected out to be in the bottom 5 of wins that season that actually finished with more than 9 wins on the year? Because if you finish with double-digit wins, phenomenal season. I don't care if you win a playoff game or not. If the New England Patriots come out and win 10 games this year, if the Broncos win 10 games this year, bravo, you get your flowers, all the success with it. The teams that finished with 10 or more wins that were projected inside the top 5 going into the year, you had the Rams in 2023. Bravo to the Rams. What happened here is you had the big Matthew Stafford bounce back. You remember 2 years ago, Matthew Stafford had the injury-riddled season, but Stafford bounces back in 2023 and the Rams are better than people expect. You had the Bengals back in 2021. This was the year of the Joe Burrow breakout. We really didn't have a great sense of what Joe Burrow was just yet. He comes in, he crushes, and we go, okay. Joe Burrow is Himothy. Now we understand. You had the 2020 Dolphins. You had the 2017 Los Angeles Rams. This was Sean McVay. So we now understand, yes, Sean McVay is Himothy. Okay. Now, looking at the whole, for teams that projected to be inside the bottom 5 overall NFL standings going into the season, you had 4 out of 50 over the past 10 seasons finishing with 10 or more wins. Good for an 8% clip. 8%. You need either a massive changeup with the coaching staff. You need either I don't want to call Joe Burrow generational. That word gets used way too much. You need an elite level quarterback breakout coming from nowhere. Or we need an injury bounce back based on what we've historically seen over the past 10 seasons. And it's going to happen less than 10% of the time. Now, going over on the opposite end, it is actually interesting that we see teams that project out to be inside the top 5, they fall more than the bottom teams rise. And it kind of makes sense as we go through these teams. We look at the Cowboys in 2020. That's when Dak gets injured. The Niners in 2020, Jimmy G gets injured. The Chargers in 2019, the Packers in 2018, the Packers in 2017, that's when Aaron Rodgers gets injured, and the Panthers in 2016. So 12% of the time, you're going to have a top 5 projected NFL team finishing with less than 8 wins. If you finish with less than 8 wins, I'm sorry, it was a bad season. Okay. So now we've established, at least I hope that we've established a bunch of different things. One, Vegas sportsbooks are very accurate. I'd make the argument, as I always have, that they're more accurate than you are. They're more accurate than I am. And I think this historical data proves that. 2, if we are looking for teams to completely fall off a cliff that were projecting out to be elite offenses going into the season, what you typically see is you see their quarterback get injured. Every once in a while, yes, you'll have the Panthers in 2016, or I don't remember what happened, but it's besides the point. It's very, very rare unless their star QB goes down. And for a team to project out to be a god-awful roster this next season and finish near the bottom of the NFL, if they're going to have a very good season, we've seen Sean McVay do it, we've seen Burrow's breakout do it, and we've seen a Stafford bounce back. Really, you need a coaching staff change, you need a random quarterback breakout, or you need an injury bounce back. So let's go ahead and let's pull up what teams at the bottom end of the NFL right now have the odds to potentially right the ship, turn it around, and project out to be near the bottom, but all of a sudden they are going to have said bounce back. Starting off with the New England Patriots. The New England Patriots are a roller coaster at the moment. You have a new coaching staff with no Belichick. You have new quarterback play with Drake May. So the range of outcomes here with New England is so damn wide that to just pencil them in inside the bottom 5 offenses, you probably can't do it, right? New England, it's possible. They go out there and they average 13 points per game this season. We could see New England be historically bad. But it's also possible maybe Drake May's great. He doesn't have to be CJ Stroud, but maybe he just comes out here and he's an average NFL quarterback right away. Maybe Belichick had actually lost it, and maybe no Belichick doesn't impact this team whatsoever. So I don't want to sit here and tell you can't draft any of the New England Patriots in fantasy. I mean, we cover this in the video as well because they're so damn cheap. Like right now, if we go over and we look at where these guys are going, I've honestly drafted a ton of Ramondre Stevenson on Underdog in particular. I haven't done any redraft drafts just yet, but you go ahead and you pull up where Ramondre Stevenson's going. Ramondre Stevenson is sitting there at pick 82. So, okay, do I want Ramondre Stevenson or do I want Najee Harris? Do I want Ramondre Stevenson or Jamison Williams? I'm fine rolling the dice on Ramondre because this offense has a wide range of outcomes and the price is so damn low. You're not having to take him in the second round. And of course, if you wanted to draft Ramondre Stevenson with me, I'm doing it every single night on the live stream on Underdog Fantasy, by far and away my favorite place to draft. You can find that link in the description, in the comment section. It's best ball, so there's no time commitment at all during the season. It's how I draft hundreds of teams every year. It's how I won $150,000 on Underdog 2 years ago. And if you use code FLOCK, they're going to hook you up with my 2024 Fantasy Football Draft Guide, my 2024 Fantasy Football Rankings, and with code FLOCK, you'll get a 50% deposit bonus up to $250. But let's move on from the Patriots. So I think the Patriots, while they're more likely than not bad based off the historical data, and maybe they have a shot to give you that breakout based off the moving pieces. You have the Denver Broncos. Denver also has a quarterback change, right? If you think that maybe Bo Nix comes in, he's the next Burrow, then sure, maybe Denver can explode. Am I going to sit here and scream, no, you can't draft any Denver Broncos? I'm not going to do that because Cortland Sutton's wide receiver 50. Sure, take him. I mean, this could be a bad offense. Sutton could be better than the wide receiver 50. Javante's RB34, Jalil's RB47. Sure, you can take the Denver Broncos because they're already priced to be horrible. Going over to the Carolina Panthers. Carolina's interesting. I've taken some Panthers myself. What you would need to see for the Panthers to come out historically, based on what's happened over the past 10 years, is you would need this new head coach to be the next McVay. I know a lot of people like him. I know he quote unquote fixed Geno. I know he quote unquote fixed Baker. But you would need him to come in and completely change what Bryce Young has been, which is a possibility. I'm not going to sit here and act like it's not. And the thing is, if you look at these Carolina Panthers, Jonathan Brooks is RB24. Deontay's wide receiver 43. Xavier Leggett's wide receiver 66. So go ahead and draft him if you want. Just understand why the expectations should be so low. Our next super low offense is actually the Giants. And this is where my main issue was, right? Because if you look at the Giants, same coaching staff, same quarterback, you do have an injury bounce back. But the thing is, like when we looked at Stafford having the injury bounce back this past season and the Rams exceeding expectations, Stafford went from winning the Super Bowl to getting injured to then bouncing back. Daniel Jones has never shown anything close to Matthew Stafford. So even with a Daniel Jones bounce back, I personally question the true upside that you get from this New York Giants offense. So that's why personally, if I'm drafting on Underdog in particular, and I have to take Malik Neighbors at the 2-3 turn, with all this data in mind, I cannot take Malik Neighbors there. Wan'Dale Robinson at wide receiver 73, you do you, I don't care. Devin Singletary, running back 32, go for it. But that's because those guys are cheap. Very similar to what we said with the Panthers guys. Very similar to what we said with the Patriots guys. Very similar to what we said with the Broncos guys. Malik Neighbors is not cheap there at the 2-3 turn. Yeah, y'all told me that Malik Neighbors right now, you're getting him in round 7 and 8 in your redraft leagues. If you can get Malik Neighbors round 7 or 8, ignore everything I just said. Go ahead and take Malik Neighbors in round 7. But anyway, this is where things get very interesting. And I'm actually expanding this. Okay, so you have Tennessee afterwards. Tennessee, you have Levis going into year 2. You have a new coaching staff. I'm very worried. Like I said, I think more likely than not, based off all this data, Tennessee's not a great offense. But you have the moving variables. You maybe have a wider range of outcomes, and maybe they surprise to the upside. I'm hoping that they are, Personally, I find the prices on Underdog to be a little bit ridiculous. I'm okay with the idea that Will Levis and this coaching staff may exceed to the upside, especially with the overall passing volume. Maybe they're a little less run heavy with the new coaching staff and with no Derrick Henry. But I've seen a lot of people in my live streams drafting under the assumption that the Titans are a good offense and they are going to be a good passing offense. When we look at this data, we can acknowledge that they have the upside to maybe be that. But ultimately, the expectation going into the year and the median outcome is that they are a bad offense, that they don't have a ton of passing volume to go around. But like I said, there's a wider range of outcomes there. Where I don't think there's a wider range of outcomes, and I just completely changed my mind on a player previously. The Raiders project out to be the 6th worst offense in the NFL this season. Technically not inside the bottom 5 in projections, but they could still very easily finish there. And if we look at the Raiders, there's not that much that in my mind gives them a massive ceiling for this next season. Unless Gardner Minshew finally, I'm not saying Minshew's a bad quarterback, but unless he figures it out to be a top 10 quarterback in the NFL, I think that we can almost confidently say that the Raiders offense will be bad this next season. I think based off what we've seen with all this historical data that we presented, I all of a sudden am going to have a hard time drafting Davante Adams with where he's going. I know on Underdog, I've cooled it. I have not been taking much Davante Adams as of late. Let me go ahead and let me pull up where he's going on ESPN and see if it's any different. Yeah, ESPN, he's wide receiver 9. I'm just personally not really going to be drafting any Davante Adams there. I love it, but this is a player that's been falling. And with how bad this offense should be this next season, I think it's difficult to take him. Washington, I don't think this applies. You have the overall change with the offensive coordinator, with the quarterback, of course, with Jane Daniels. Pittsburgh, you have a quarterback change. You have an offensive coordinator change there as well. So maybe they have upside. But really, in terms of the bottom offenses, my takeaway is if the guy is super cheap, who cares? Take him. If you have to take him in round 2 and he's a wide receiver and he's going to be in one of the worst offenses in the NFL and it doesn't seem like there's super wide range of outcomes, I'm probably cooling it. I'm not taking much Neighbors. I'm not going to be taking much Davante Adams. And then on the flip side of this, like we talked about in terms of the offenses that project out to be very good that could potentially fall off a cliff, it's extremely difficult to figure out where those would come from outside of the injury concern that you'd possibly have with the quarterback. So if you think, oh my gosh, Burrow's wrist is really going to be a problem, then maybe you put a little bit of an asterisk on their median projection where they are supposed to be the 6th best offense. Or if you think, oh my gosh, Tua's 1 hit away from getting another concussion, yada, 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 maybe you put a little bit of an asterisk. But my thought process is you're not going to be able to predict injuries. If Vegas is telling you the Lions are going to be an elite offense, just understand the Lions will most likely be an elite offense. If they're telling you the Chiefs are going to be very good, understand the Chiefs are probably going to be very good. Don't overthink it. Use the projections. Understand that there's a wide range of outcomes where you have situations that are changing dramatically. But just because there's a wide range of outcomes and there's a ceiling that's higher than the median projection, it doesn't mean you should act like the median projection doesn't exist. So recap everything here. Davante Adams, Malik Neighbors, probably tough to take in round 2 of drafts at the moment. But I think that's all I got for you. Really appreciate you. And hope that we were able to help out some way here with answering all the questions that we have regarding Vegas sportsbooks. I wasn't really going to make this. It took me way too much time to do all the research, but we got 1,000 comments wanting it. So I figured might as well do it for you, but appreciate you. Really hope you have a great day. Hope I get a draft against you in the live stream tonight.